The distant sound of horse hooves broke the stillness of the Montana prairie as Tessa Turner clutched her wailing 2-year-old son closer to her chest, desperately trying to calm him while scanning the horizon. The small cabin she'd managed to maintain since her husband's death felt more isolated than ever as little Matthew's cries for his father, a man he'd never known, tore at her heart. "Hush now, Matthew," Tessa whispered, bouncing him gently on her hip. "Papa's gone to heaven, remember." But the words offered little comfort to either of them. The spring of 1876 had brought new growth to the land, but no relief to her circumstances. The approaching rider materialized from the golden haze of sunset, a tall figure atop a muscular chestnut stallion. Tessa tensed, one hand instinctively reaching for the shotgun propped beside the door. Strangers in this part of Montana territory rarely brought good news. "Stay here, little one," she murmured, setting Matthew on the handmade quilt spread across the cabin floor. His sobs quieted to curious hiccups as he watched his mother step onto the porch, shotgun held ready but not aimed. The rider slowed his horse, raising one hand in a peaceful gesture. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Name's Xavier Keane. Looking for work and a place to water my horse, if you'd be willing." Tessa studied him carefully. Tall and broad-shouldered beneath a dust-covered denim shirt and leather vest, with dark hair peeking from beneath a well-worn hat. His face was weathered but youthful, perhaps 25 or 26, with several days of stubble shadowing his jaw. What caught her attention most were his eyes, steady and clear despite his obvious fatigue. "Not much work here, Mr. Keane," she replied firmly. "Just me and my boy working this homestead." Xavier dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "Begging your pardon, but it looks like you could use an extra pair of hands." He gestured toward the listing fence and the half-repaired barn roof. "I'm handy with tools and good with horses. Just passing through, but I could help set things right before moving on." Before Tessa could respond, Matthew toddled onto the porch, his face tear-streaked but curious. "Papa?" he asked, looking up at the stranger with hopeful eyes. The question hung in the air, painful in its innocence. Tessa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and grief. "No, Matthew, this is just a traveler." Xavier removed his hat, revealing sun-lightened streaks in his otherwise dark hair. He crouched down to Matthew's level, his movements gentle. "Hello there, young man. I'm not your papa, but I'm mighty pleased to meet you." Matthew studied him solemnly, then reached out with chubby fingers to touch Xavier's stubbly cheek. "Scratchy," he declared, which brought an unexpected smile to Tessa's lips. "That it is," Xavier agreed, his eyes crinkling as he smiled. "Been on the trail too long." "Papa gone," Matthew announced with the brutal honesty of a child. "Mama cry," Tessa felt her throat tighten. "Matthew, that's enough," she said softly. Xavier's expression changed, understanding dawning in his eyes. He bent even lower, meeting Matthew's gaze directly. "I'm sorry about your papa, little one, but I promise while I'm here, I'll do whatever I can to help you and your mama." The simple words, spoken without pretense, touched something in Tessa she'd thought long buried. Not hope she couldn't afford such luxury, but perhaps possibility. "We don't need charity," she said firmly. "Not offering any," Xavier replied, standing and returning his hat to his head. "Offering fair work for fair payment. Food and a place to sleep in your barn is all I ask for a week's labor." Tessa hesitated. The farm was failing without Thomas. Her late husband had been gone 16 months now, taken by pneumonia during a harsh winter, leaving her with a newborn son and 80 acres she couldn't properly manage alone. Pride had prevented her from seeking help, but practicality was becoming impossible to ignore. "1 week," she agreed finally. "You can start with that roof tomorrow." Xavier nodded. "Yes, madam, thank you." He turned to lead his horse toward the barn. "Mr. Keane," Tessa called after him. When he looked back, she added, "Supper's at sundown, nothing fancy, but you're welcome to it." He touched the brim of his hat. "Much appreciated, Mrs. Turner, Tessa Turner, Mrs. Turner." He smiled, and something in that smile made her look away quickly. Dinner was indeed simple beans, cornbread, and the last of a stew Tessa had made from a rabbit she'd trapped. They ate in relative silence, broken only by Matthew's occasional babbling and Xavier's polite compliments on the food. "Where are you headed, Mr. Keane?" Tessa asked finally. Xavier wiped his mouth with a bandana. No particular destination. Worked cattle drives in Texas, tried my hand at mining in Colorado. Now just following the horizon, I suppose. Running from something? The question slipped out before she could stop it. His eyes met hers steadily. No, madam. Not running, just haven't found a reason to stop yet. After dinner, Xavier insisted on washing the dishes despite Tessa's protests. She put Matthew to bed while he worked, singing a soft lullaby until the boy's eyes drifted closed. When she returned, Xavier was standing on the porch, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette and gazing at the stars. "Good night, Mr. Keane," she said formally. "There's clean straw in the barn loft. Help yourself to the pump if you need water." He nodded, extinguishing the cigarette carefully. "Thank you. I'll be up at first light." True to his word, Xavier was already working when Tessa emerged the next morning. She watched from the doorway as he moved confidently across the barn roof, replacing broken shingles with practiced efficiency. Matthew stood in the yard below, watching with fascination. "Be careful up there," she called, surprised by her own concern. Xavier grinned down at her. "Always am, Mrs. Turner." By midday, the roof was repaired, and he'd moved on to mending the corral fence. By evening, he'd chopped enough firewood to last a month. Tessa found herself impressed despite her determination to maintain emotional distance. Over the next few days, Xavier proved himself invaluable. He repaired the wagon wheel that had been broken since winter, cleared irrigation channels for her small vegetable garden, and even coaxed her temperamental milk cow into giving more milk than she had in months. More surprising was his way with Matthew. The boy followed Xavier everywhere, peppered him with questions, and delighted in being allowed to help with simple tasks. For his part, Xavier showed endless patience, answering each question seriously and praising Matthew's efforts. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Matthew dozed in Xavier's lap, exhausted from a day of helping repair fences. "He's taken quite a shine to you," Tessa observed, trying to ignore the warmth the sight evoked in her. Xavier smiled down at the sleeping child. "He's a fine boy." "You've done well with him." "It hasn't been easy," she admitted. "He asks about his father more lately. Thomas died before Matthew was even old enough to remember him. That's hard." Xavier's voice was gentle. "For both of you," Tessa nodded, surprised to find tears threatening. She blinked them back fiercely. "We manage." "Yes, you do," Xavier agreed. "But managing isn't the same as living, is it?" The perceptiveness of his observation unsettled her. "What would you know about it?" she asked, more sharply than intended. Xavier didn't take offense. "Lost my family in a fire when I was 12. Grew up fast after that, bouncing between relatives who didn't much want another mouth to feed. Been on my own since 16. He spoke matter-of-factly without self-pity. "I know about managing versus living." Tessa felt ashamed of her sharpness. "I'm sorry," he shrugged. "Long time ago now. Point is, I understand something about loss." The week passed quickly, too quickly. Xavier repaired everything that needed fixing and several things Tessa hadn't even realized were broken. Each night, they sat on the porch after Matthew was asleep, talking in the comfortable darkness. Tessa found herself sharing stories of Thomas, of her childhood in Illinois, of her hopes and fears for Matthew's future. Xavier spoke of his travels, of cattle drives and mining camps, of the characters he'd met and the sights he'd seen. He never presumed, never pushed, but Tessa found herself drawing closer to him nonetheless, physically and emotionally. On what was to be his last evening at the farm, Tessa found herself dreading the morning. She'd grown accustomed to his steady presence, his quiet competence, the way he made her laugh with his dry observations. "Your week's up tomorrow," she said as they watched the sunset from the porch steps. Xavier nodded, his profile gilded by the fading light. "It is. You've earned more than meals and a bed in the barn," Tessa continued. "I wish I could pay you properly." "Wasn't expecting payment," he reminded her, "though I'll admit your cooking alone was worth the work." She smiled at that. "Where will you go?" He was silent for a long moment. "Not sure. Thought I might head up to Helena. Heard they're building there. Could find carpentry work." "You'd be good at that," Tessa agreed, trying to keep her voice neutral. Matthew chose that moment to rush onto the porch, clutching a crude wooden horse Xavier had carved for him. "Look, Mama, Xavier made it go fast," he demonstrated by running the toy along the porch railing. "That's wonderful, Matthew," she said, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. "Xavier's staying forever?" Matthew asked, climbing into the cowboy's lap with the easy familiarity of complete trust. Tessa felt her heart clench at the question. Xavier's eyes met hers over Matthew's head. "I'll be moving on tomorrow, partner," Xavier told him gently. "Got to find work elsewhere." Matthew's face crumpled. "No, stay, be my papa," the words hung in the air, devastating in their simplicity. Tessa felt herself flush with embarrassment. "Matthew, that's enough," she said firmly. "Mr. Keane has his own life to live. Go wash up for dinner now." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he obeyed, trudging into the house with slumped shoulders. Tessa couldn't bring herself to look at Xavier. "I'm sorry," she said stiffly. "He shouldn't have said that." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "No need to apologize. He's just a little boy who wants what every child wants. Still, it was inappropriate. I've never encouraged such thoughts." "I know that." Xavier's voice was gentle. "But Tessa, what if I stayed?" She looked at him then, startled by both the question and his use of her given name. "What?" "What if I stayed?" he repeated. "Not forever necessarily, but longer. Through the planting season at least. You could use the help and He hesitated. "I've enjoyed being here." Tessa's heart raced. "Why would you do that? There's nothing for you here." His eyes held hers steadily. "I think there might be, if you'd allow it." The implication was clear, and Tessa felt a flutter of something long-forgotten desire, possibility, hope. "It wouldn't be proper," she managed. "I'd sleep in the barn still," he said quickly. "Keep everything above board. Just help with the work, spend time with Matthew, get to know you better." His expression was earnest. "Unless you're eager to see the back of me." "No," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I'm not." Xavier's smile warmed her more than the spring sunshine had all day. "Then I'll stay, for a while." The while stretched into summer. Xavier proved himself indispensable during planting season, his strong back and farming knowledge helping Tessa plant more acreage than she would have managed alone. They established a comfortable routine, working side by side during daylight hours, sharing meals, then talking on the porch while the stars emerged. Matthew blossomed under Xavier's attention. The cowboy taught him to fish in the creek that bordered the property, showed him how to care for the animals, and told him stories of the wider world beyond their homestead. The boy's nightmares subsided, and his questions about his father grew less frequent, though Tessa made sure they still spoke of Thomas regularly. The dynamics between Tessa and Xavier shifted gradually, almost imperceptibly. A lingering touch when passing tools, shared smiles over Matthew's antics. Conversations that stretched later into the night, growing more personal, more meaningful. One evening in early July, as they sat on the porch watching heat lightning flicker on the distant horizon, Xavier's hand found hers in the darkness. Tessa didn't pull away. They sat in silence, fingers intertwined, each lost in private thoughts that somehow seemed shared. The next day brought a sudden summer storm that forced them to abandon fieldwork. They ran for the shelter of the cabin, soaked and laughing. As Tessa handed Xavier a towel, their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Before she could think, he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back with a hunger that surprised them both. They broke apart breathless when Matthew's voice called from the bedroom where he'd been napping. Reality crashed back, and Tessa stepped away, confused by her own actions. "I shouldn't have done that," Xavier said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry." "No, it wasn't just you," Tessa admitted. They were interrupted by Matthew bounding into the room, excited by the storm. The moment passed, but something had fundamentally changed. That night, after Matthew was asleep, Xavier found Tessa in the barn, checking on a sick calf. "We need to talk about what happened," he said without preamble. Tessa nodded, stroking the calf's head nervously. "Yes, I suppose we do." Xavier ran a hand through his hair. "I care for you, Tessa, more than I expected to, more than might be wise, but I need you to know I respect you and your situation." "I would never presume I care for you too," she interrupted, finally meeting his gaze. "But it's complicated. I have Matthew to think about, and memories of Thomas." "I understand that." Xavier stepped closer. "I would never ask you to forget Thomas. He'll always be Matthew's father and an important part of your life." "And what would you be?" Tessa asked quietly. "Whatever you'll allow," he answered honestly. "Friend, partner, more if you wanted that someday, but only when you're ready, if you're ever ready." His sincerity moved her. "I thought I'd never feel this way again," she confessed. "After Thomas died, I shut that part of myself away, focused only on survival and raising Matthew." "You've done an amazing job of both," Xavier said, "but you deserve more than just survival, Tessa. You deserve happiness too." She looked down at her hands. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing again. Of Matthew getting attached and then being hurt if you leave." Xavier gently tilted her chin up to meet his eyes. "I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise that I won't leave willingly. Not unless you ask me to go." The conviction in his voice was unmistakable. Tessa felt something shift inside her, a wall beginning to crumble. "I don't want you to go," she whispered. Xavier's kiss this time was gentle, a promise rather than a demand. Tessa allowed herself to sink into it, to feel the possibilities it contained. As summer stretched into autumn, their relationship deepened. Xavier continued to sleep in the barn, insisting on propriety for Tessa's reputation in the small community. But their affection grew more open, more confident. They traveled into town together, enduring the curious stares and whispers with dignity. Xavier proved himself to the skeptical townspeople through hard work and respectful behavior. When the harvest came, neighbors who might have gossiped instead pitched in, impressed by what Tessa and Xavier had accomplished with the farm. It was during the harvest that disaster struck. Xavier was helping load hay into the loft when the old ladder broke beneath him. The fall was bad, a broken leg and cracked ribs that left him bedridden for weeks. Tessa moved him into the house despite the potential for gossip, setting up a bed in the main room where she could tend to him. She refused to consider alternatives, working herself to exhaustion caring for both Xavier and Matthew while trying to finish the harvest alone. Neighbors helped where they could, but the burden fell primarily on Tessa's shoulders. Through it all, Xavier's spirits remained high, though she could see the frustration in his eyes at his inability to work. "You should have let me stay in the barn," he said one evening as she changed his bandages. "People will talk," Tessa shrugged. "Let them. I can't take proper care of you out there, and I won't have you suffering for appearances' sake." Xavier caught her hand. "You're exhausted, you're doing too much." "I'm managing," she insisted. "There's that word again." His voice was gentle. "Managing, not living." She sighed, sitting beside him on the edge of the bed. "What choice do I have? Let me help," came Matthew's small voice from across the room. The boy approached determinedly, carrying a cup of water. "For Xavier," he announced proudly, carefully offering it to the injured man. Xavier accepted it with exaggerated gratitude. "Thank you, partner. Best water I've ever had." Matthew beamed, then climbed onto the bed beside Xavier. "I help Mama too, we take care of you." The simple declaration brought unexpected tears to Tessa's eyes. Xavier reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You have a fine boy," he told her, "and he's right. We'll manage this together." Those weeks of Xavier's recovery transformed their relationship in unexpected ways. Confined to bed, he taught Matthew his letters and numbers, told stories, and carved more wooden animals despite the awkwardness of working from a prone position. He and Tessa talked for hours, deeper conversations than before, about hopes and dreams, fears and regrets. By the time Xavier was well enough to move about with crutches, winter had set in. There was no question of him returning to the barn in the cold, nor any pretense that their relationship was merely friendship. They had become a family in all but name. On Christmas Eve, with Matthew finally asleep after the excitement of hanging his stocking, Xavier asked Tessa to join him by the fire. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Been carrying it for a while, waiting for the right time." He handed her a small wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate floral patterns. Inside lay a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," Xavier explained as Tessa stared at it, speechless. "Only thing I have left of her, Xavier." "I love you, Tessa," he said simply. "I love Matthew too. These past months have given me something I never thought I'd find: a home, a family, He took her hands in his. "I'm asking if you'll be my wife, if you'll let me be a father to Matthew, not replacing Thomas but giving him what he needs now." Tessa felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Are you sure?" "This life, it's hard, unglamorous work. No adventures like you've had before," Xavier smiled. "I've had enough adventures to know that none of them meant as much as one day here with you and Matthew." His expression grew serious. "I know I can't promise it will always be easy. But I can promise to love you both, to work alongside you, to build a life that's more than just surviving." Tessa thought of that day months ago when Matthew had cried for a father, when Xavier had first promised to help. He had kept that promise in ways she couldn't have imagined. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in January of 1877 in the small church in town, with Matthew proudly serving as ring bearer. The same neighbors who had once whispered about them now celebrated their union, won over by Xavier's integrity and Tessa's quiet strength. Spring brought new beginnings. Xavier officially adopted Matthew, though they always kept Thomas's memory alive through stories and a small photograph Tessa treasured. The farm prospered under their combined efforts, allowing them to hire occasional help rather than working themselves to exhaustion. One warm evening in May, almost exactly a year since Xavier had first ridden up to their cabin, they sat together on the porch swing he had built. Matthew played nearby with the dog Xavier had brought home as a surprise, a gangly puppy that followed the boy everywhere. "Any regrets?" Xavier asked, his arm around Tessa's shoulders. She leaned into him, watching their son laugh as the puppy licked his face. "Not a single one, even though I'm just a dusty cowboy who showed up out of nowhere." Tessa smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach, where the first subtle swell of new life was just becoming noticeable. "You're the man who kept his promise, to all of us." Xavier's eyes widened as he understood her meaning. "Really, you're sure?" She nodded, joy bubbling through her at his reaction. "Doctor confirmed it yesterday in town, due in November." His whoop of delight brought Matthew running to them, curious about the commotion. Xavier scooped the boy up, spinning him around. "How would you feel about being a big brother, partner?" he asked. Matthew's face lit up. "A brother like Jimmy has. Or a sister," Tessa added, laughing at his enthusiasm. "We won't know until the baby arrives." "When tomorrow?" Matthew asked eagerly. Xavier chuckled, setting the boy on his knee. "Not quite that soon, but before winter comes again." Matthew considered this seriously, then nodded. "Good, I can teach them everything, like you teach me." "That's right," Xavier agreed, reaching for Tessa's hand. "That's what families do." As the sunset painted the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Tessa looked at her husband and son, this family she had never expected to find again after Thomas's death. Life had taken unexpected turns, bringing hardship, but also this profound joy. She thought of that desperate young widow she had been, and the lonely, wandering cowboy who had appeared when they needed him most. How a child's innocent plea had changed all their lives. "I love you," she told Xavier softly as Matthew ran off to continue playing with the puppy. "And I love you," he replied, his eyes reflecting the same wonder she felt at their journey together. "Always will." They remained on the porch until the stars emerged, talking of the future, the baby coming, improvements to the farm, dreams for Matthew's education. No longer just managing, but truly living, together. The Montana night settled around them like a blessing, full of promise and possibility. And as Matthew eventually tired and came to snuggle between them, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where they all belonged.